Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders with Marketing Huddle. Today we have with us Edward Jobes, who is with the Trinity team at Keller Williams Real Estate. Welcome to the program, Edward.
Well, thank you, Mike.
Hey, so get us started with telling us a little bit about your background and what led you into the real estate industry.
Well, Mike, I had 24 years at the bedside as a RN. The last decade was ICU and ER, and we had some medical sales experience, industrial water sales experience in there. And my kids are now of school age, 3 and 6, so I had to come up with a way to raise my kids and still work without going to maybe nights and weekends, which I spent the first 10 years of my career doing. So real estate appeared to be a great avenue for working while raising my kids. So
that's really an interesting background, and I'll bet there's some great connections that you've had just because that's a really specific niche in the medical industry. Tell us a little bit about maybe some types of people that you work with or help, or maybe if you can give us an example of a transaction that you've done, because I think it's really neat to be able to tell a story about what kind of impact, rather than I help people with real estate. What does that really look like?
Well, sure, Mike. I'd say about 90% of my clientele are either nurses or physician assistants, doctors, and then the other 10% are just referrals or people that I've met, just kind of in the last couple of years of being in this industry. And so one of the last clients that I worked with was an RN. She was a single mother, and we had a inspection and appraisal kind of hiccup on the back side of this closing. And I think that what's a good thing to talk about, what's a good thing to bring up is when you have inspection and appraisals, they kind of tag team each other, and the lender looks at these inspections and appraisals. And then it depends on what kind of loan you have, that how much they're going to critique the back end of these by the underwriter. So I had a well and septic up in the mountains that needed to be tested. And when we had the inspector up there, he brought up another guy that was a well specialist, but in his same kind of franchise. So the reports came back, and numbers tell you what specifically your system's ranges need to be. So with the pump pressures, you need to be at a certain PSI. You have to have storage tank pressures that when they drop to a certain level, these pumps kick on. You have your septic tank has to be so many feet from your home as well as from the pump. And we kind of ran into the inspection notes coming back to our underwriter, and the underwriter for the bank did not like the numbers that were seen. So we had some PSI that came in a little, like 2 PSI different than what the legal normal should be. So this kind of put a hiccup in things, and now you're having to run around and do amend extends, get somebody out there to readjust things. And once we had somebody up there who set our pressures appropriately, our cut-ins appropriately, and then it was after that we were told, well, we got to do this again. We got to do another amend extend and push out the closing date another week because the septic system did not have a clear identifiable placement. There wasn't a map. There wasn't a permit that we could find. This is probably a 45, 50-year-old system up in the mountains. And we live here in Colorado, and there's some tight regulations when it comes to water. So we had an inspector go back out there, and we measured off the distance from the septic to the home, measured off the septic to the pump, and got those numbers in. And now we're back in play. But this started kind of a domino effect even on the lender side, because the lender wants to close. We want to close. The seller wants to close. Agents want to close. So you want the title companies helping you get there. Now the lenders are jumping through hoops to kind of help you get there. And they were working after 5 on Friday. They were responding on Saturday and Sunday just to get us to make sure that we could close on Monday. We had this lady that is trying to get into a home where she had 5 horses when we started this. Unfortunately, one passed away during the process. She had goats and dogs, horses, and 2 kids. She's a single nurse and needs to get into this home. She doesn't want to be stranded without a place. And so everybody knew that, and the seller was going to Alaska for 5 weeks and could not postpone much longer. If you want to close on your house, you want to be there. So, we just weren't running into any more time to spare. And we had the lending team jump in, the title team jump in, and just doing their best to communicate with that underwriter. The inspector came out on his time off before he had to get on a plane. So you want to talk about a team of people that want to get you to the end game, but you also want to talk about that when you meet people, you want to say, listen, when their inspection's done and anybody says, we recommend, you want to follow up on those recommendations right away.
Yeah.
You don't want this to come down to the 11th hour.
Because it's, in this case, in many cases in transactions like that, it's not necessarily a recommendation. It is a preemptive, strike to prepare for what the underwriters could see. Because let's put it this way, the underwriters need to have all their little boxes checked off for what they can get approval for when they get their loan off of their books. So they're not going to approve something and get left holding the bag. So I agree with that statement. Sure, these inspections and things might seem, a little pricey if you have to pay for them or include them in the process, but it really brings up these opportunities to, not have the stress. Here's something when you were talking, I wrote this down because it just really screams relational capital, meaning you mentioned the word team, and so, you're with the Trinity team, but I think a lot of people don't realize this, and there's a lot of agents, real estate agents out there that are real estate agents. They, kind of a one-man show, one-woman show, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the thing that I recognize with your example here is you personally are a part of a team, and it's not just the Trinity team where there's decades and decades of experience where you personally could even behind the scenes be going and getting advice and strategy with your team. But you mentioned something that's really powerful. Here's your buyer that they just want to get in the house, and the seller just wants to sell it and get on their trip to Alaska. Nobody knows or cares about all these things in the background. They just want things to work out. But you are guiding that team and accessing your team's relational capital with people like title and inspectors and people working on Saturdays and Sundays. If you were not good in the business, those people would not work past 5:01 on Friday, much less Saturday and Sunday. So speak a little bit about team and the relationships you guys and you personally have created so that you are bringing all of this to the table when you work with a buyer or a seller.
Well, Mike, one thing you do when you get into this business is you start finding people that you want to either brand yourself with. Maybe they're helping you on some marketing. You want to find somebody who is a go-to for you. So you would say, some places have an in-house lender or an in-house title company or something like this. But then you have your preferred teams. So you have your preferred title people that have done, dozens of deals for you just this year alone, let alone in the history of working with your customers. Mm-hmm. So you have the same thing with the lenders. You have your preferred lenders. Why do you have them? You know that they've jumped through the hoops for you. You know that they've done the best that they could do previous transactions. So when you know these people and you build that rapport with them and you're working with them, they know that their bread and butter relies on you as well. So they're going to do the best that they can do as well. If they drop the ball, say 2 or 3 times, in a year, How big is that ball? Did they make up for it? Did they have a team approach to trying to back it and taking care of you? That's a big, very important aspect to choosing, even though you're not on the same team contractually. You're on the same team because you're my preferred person on this. I know that we have a rapport. I know that we have talked about each other's kids. I know that, I know who is on your team, and I know that you guys have family stuff. Same here. But when you talk to each other until 9 o'clock at night with business, because you're taking care of somebody who is, say, a single mother with kids and, domestic animals, livestock, you have these different aspects that come into play where you want those people in your mind. You know that this person is going to pull through, and then they do, and then at the end game, your client shows up with a gift for you. Not so much that you had your closing gift, but they come to the table with something for you, and you're like, you did not need to do this. But that's how appreciative the backside is of this, getting it all through. Everybody understood the complications that it took, but, you just open up your mind, say, what can we do? Who can we talk to? What does it take? Who do we know that has the specialty that we can call and figure out answers if we're not getting them from our direct team? Who do we know? So it does play, very, very importantly into each of these transactions as to your teams that you're going to use.
So I would just say, for someone listening and considering, potentially buying or selling a home and choosing an agent, because there's that choice. Every time that someone does a transaction, what are some things they can look for to make sure that they have the kind of support that you have, and to really compare it up against what you provide with your team and your network and the full service one-stop shop that Trinity team provides? Because I think that sometimes people they're just so busy, and they worry that if I go, well, this guy sent me a fridge magnet, I guess I should call him. How do you compare that up against the power of what you guys provide?
I'll tell you that's a good topic. You have a buyer who knows really nothing about the market. They might know a percentage, maybe 5% of what goes on in the market, but they don't know anything more than there's a phone book to call an inspector, there's a phone book to call a lender. So we give out, I do a very good job of giving out 2 lender names and 2 inspector names, and I don't tell you which that you should use. I say, these are our preferred. We've used them. We've had a good record with them. Now, it is absolutely okay that you use anybody that you want to, whether it's just using the phone book and crossing your fingers, or if you're using some kind of, web site and looking at their reviews. But I give you teams that we know, these people we know, that we've done work with, that we've closed deals with. And we know that these people are going to step up for our team because we do a big volume, and they know that they're going to keep us and our clients in the best hands possible.
Yeah, that's an intangible that becomes invaluable in the case like what you just mentioned previously, where you don't know these things are going to happen until you get in, and then at that point it is really too late. So let's talk a little bit about some other potential considerations. That do you work mostly with buyers or mostly with sellers, or is it a even mix?
It really is an even mix at this point. It's a 50-50.
So is there a specific, maybe a red flag that a buyer or a seller would be typically making in a real estate transaction that you've seen in your experience that you can go, you know what, I'm going to help these people not make this mistake that I've seen so many people make, and here's one piece of advice that I always give, or to help them be prepared for something like that? Because as you know, if we keep making the same mistakes over and over and over again, there's no benefit in that. But if we see a mistake and then we can help educate and become the advocate for our buyer or seller, now all of a sudden you can say, hey guys, you know what, we need to make sure we don't, or make sure we have this in place. What are some things that way that are some good tips?
Well, Mike, if you have if you want to talk about a red flag is when you have a market that moves like the Denver market. We're top 20% in America. We have a very competitive market. We're moving up in our price range at over $6.50 an hour, $6.50 an hour on average that our homes are moving up in price. So it is a competitive market. We have 4,300 homes on market in a market that should have 33,000 homes. So some of the competitiveness will start to be where a buyer will say, we'll waive inspection, we'll waive appraisal. If you sit there and you have the money for that, and it's not going to put a dent in your life, I can see that, but most people aren't there. 80% of people can't afford anything more than a $350,000 home. So I would recommend not waiving appraisals and inspections if you can by any chance not do this. Now, there is such a thing as waiving items outside of safety, structure, and health. So if there is anything that could be nails sticking out, or if there's formaldehyde that was used in the wood, or if there's electrical problems hanging out, or if there's structure issues, these are things you don't want to get into a home and find, because now you're not talking $2,000 or $3,000 to fix. You're talking tens of thousands of dollars. So I would say red flags are when people have heard that you can waive inspections and that will get you your house from the seller because they know they're going to have a least complicated transaction. But that doesn't benefit you. And it really doesn't benefit the seller. The seller's going to look kind of bad if the inspector gets out there and notices everything. And then, you said you weren't going to come back to me with anything. I get it. Yeah, there's electrical problems and structural problems, but you said you were going to do this. Yeah. So I'm going to keep your earnest money if you're walking. So even if they're collecting your $2,500 or $5,000 earnest money because you're going to walk, you don't want this avenue. So my recommendation is get your inspection, review it, and in fact, just walk the inspection with your inspector. Learn the home before you get in it, and just prepare yourself for the market that we have and say, I can afford to be on the market for a while. I can afford to put in 3 to 6 offers before I'm actually considered. And just because I'm considered doesn't mean that our negotiations are done. So if you get into this market, if you as a buyer get into this market, say, I have the time frame needed. Don't wait till the last minute. You do not want to be 11th hour in an aggressive market.
Yeah, because at that point you're scrambling and you're potentially taking compromises and shortcuts that you didn't need to, and all it took was just knowing what to expect. So I think that's a really huge piece of it, and I think that too many times people do get kind of caught up in the moment, and maybe having that level-headed piece of advice from you and your team to say, listen, here's an option, but let's take a look at what could happen if it goes this way or that way. And I'm sure that there's been many examples of times where someone has said to you at the closing, oh my goodness, if we had done this way when we first initially thought of it, wow, I'm so glad we didn't. Thank you so much for the advice. So I think that's a huge piece. Any final thoughts that you can think of that you'd like to make? And then let's tell people how they can reach out and connect with you and learn a little bit about how you do business.
Absolutely. One little piece of information I also want to let everybody know is, inspections and appraisals. These 2 items are very important to get you into your home. The lender has to have these items, whether it's a CHAPA, FHA, if it's just a standard conventional. They're going to have to review a lot of items. So make sure that you're dealing with a professional that has experience in each of these categories. So, they have this experience in their pocket. They know the resources that they have to go to. There are a lot of great agents out there, but there are also a lot of great agents out there that don't know land, septic, well, or just certain niches. So if you're going to get into an area, make sure that you know that your agent they don't have to specialize in it. They just have to have had experience with it more than one or two times.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And sometimes people can kind of sense and feel when someone's kind of hedging a little bit. So when you do ask that person, do you have any experience with, just make sure that they're competent, make sure they've got a good, response, and that you feel sure that they've got your best interest in mind. That's a really important piece, Edward. So what's the best way that people can reach out and connect with you?
Well, you can go to our website, which is www.trinityteamrealestateco.com, and that'll introduce you to our whole team. So, Mike, we do property management, we do commercial sales, we do land sales, we do residential buyers, residential listings. So we are kind of one and all. We have almost 70 years of experience in that office. Gordon is one of our longest people. It's really kind of all under him first at 39 years experience, and then his son Eric is some 20 years in the business. So you always have a strong background of resources coming from our team. There's really a few questions you're not going to find an answer for with us. We have the resources, we have the experience, we have the preferred lenders, we have the preferred title companies, we have our inspectors, we have our connections with appraisers to find out answers to questions. We would be hard pressed not to be able to answer truthfully and timely a question that you would have.
I love it. That's awesome. Thank you for your insights today, Edward. That was awesome getting to know you and some of the tips and recommendations that you have. So thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Mike, I appreciate you for letting me be on your show today.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneurssradio.com.